Most architects and engineers know nothing about the third worst structural failure in modern history. This does not happen by office fires.
The collapse of World Trade Center 7 was primarily due to fire.
Not one of them has ever collapsed, not even these after 9/11. What buildings have come down like this? Controlled demolition.
We did not find any evidence that explosives were used.
You heard explosions.
Big explosion.
Just seen a big flash.
Like a boom. We have more information of bombs, like an explosion.
Office fires don't melt steel. So what's going on here? Is there enough to warrant an investigation?
COVID-19 originated in animals sold in a so-called wet market in China.
All steps for man, scientists for mankind.
Well, good morning and welcome to another episode of the Conspiracy Conversation. I am your host, David Whited, and this is our time to step aside from our typical Flyover Conservatives nightly show where we're kind of digging into the daily news, the daily, looking at culture, current events through the lens of conservative Christian values. This is our opportunity for the questions that come up and the content that's out there that we say, let's kind of break away from that format and let's go deep on something that a lot of people have questions on. And sometimes you're actually not even allowed to talk about what possibly could have been a cause or what could be the answers. And when we began the idea of this show, today's content is exactly what we had in mind. One of my favorite topics to discuss, to look into, and something that I'm baffled when I'm out at live events, I'm in conversations with people, how little they know about the true events or some of the true questions on 9/11. And even this little statue that I have here with me today has two very popular towers, but they weren't the only ones that went down and were attacked on that day and have some interesting speculation about them. So when we dive into things on Conspiracy Conversations, here's the rules. Number one, I don't bring on a guest to iron out their wrinkles and to dispute things. I'm here to learn, to take notes, and hopefully you're ready to do the same. If you're starting up the lawnmower, you're jumping on the treadmill, we're going to have an incredible conversation here today. The second thing I try to do is be able to have a conversation about something that I don't know with an open mind. A lot of people walk through life thinking, hey, Rubik's Cubes are red, and they can have a conversation about that all day long and argue about how red Rubik's Cubes are. But sometimes you have a conversation with somebody who spent thousands of hours in private, and they come to the table and they just kind of rotate this a little bit, and it's like, oh my gosh, they're also green. I had no idea. And that's kind of the purpose of this. It'd be really sad to be 20 years old and say, hey, here's the 5 or 6 things I know in life and I never want to talk about them again. And they just throw up a wall. It'd be kind of a sad place to live because there's a lot of things that I've had people that are just animate that this is how it happened. And then you show them a couple of pieces of undisputable evidence and they're like, whoa, I didn't even know about that. Now I got some question. I'm not 100% sure. And that's kind of the purpose of this. So I hope you got your mind ready to go. We have a true expert today. It's the second time I've had a conversation with today's guest. He's from the San Francisco Bay Area. He's an architect, a member of the American Institute of Architects. He and his wife, Gail, are leading a charge towards real investigations into the destruction of all 3 World Trade Center skyscrapers on September 11th, 2001. He's a guy you are going to learn a lot from, and the world's best expert that I could think of to talk about 9/11, Mr. Richard Gage.
Thank you for the standing ovation.
Oh,
that's wonderful.
Life's too important to leave applause up to chance. Sometimes we just gotta build those in, and I just want to commend you before we begin because I've followed your work for quite a while. This is the second conversation I've had with you, but something we try to do on this show so often, we're pointing out things that are wrong with the world, with sex trafficking or this and drugs, just problems that are going on in the world, and the problem usually traces back, though, there's not enough people with a predetermined moral compass and a spine that actually, if 9 people say, hey, this is the deal, they just kind of close up and they go along. It's like, hey, it wasn't my fault. I was just following orders in this hospital. It wasn't my fault. I was just, and of the guests we've had, the thing I want to commend you on is is you have the courage to speak truth. And I think no matter what, you would speak the truth and as the best and you do the work to back up that truth and have the receipts. And so I just think that the world would not be in the shape it's in today if there was even just 1% more Richard Gages out there. So thank you for what you do, truly.
Thank you, David. It's really my honor to be here with you and your guests today. What's most important is that this information get as far and wide, because it will awaken the public to the devastating set of circumstances we find ourselves in with a deep state performing false flag operations like this, like COVID, and like so many others. And we have to bring them all down, the deep state included, by exposing these operations. And this is just one of them, but it's one that I've spent 18 years uncovering, and I know that your audience will be flabbergasted at the evidence here that we're going to talk about.
We do a great job of breaking things down scientifically, so get ready to learn a lot today, Flyover family. And the thing I love, I remember the first time I think I saw you, you were with Patrick Bet-David, and I've seen you on other shows as well as our own conversation. And you're really quick to say, this is what I know, and this is what I think. And this is what a lot of others say, but I don't know. And I think that's an important place to be. Like when you know something like this is, I know this, and I think this. And that transparency, is what we, need more of. And you've really done the work to broaden that base of what you know. And in a world where a lot of the things we're talking about, there's been a massive media effort to poke holes into it, and a lot of people just hear that and they just go on. So I think this is a really important conversation, because you're going to share some stuff today that a lot of our listeners probably have never heard.
That's typical.
Unfortunately.
And it's very unfortunate, particularly when we talk about the third skyscraper that collapsed on that day, World Trade Center Building 7. And I've found that most architects and engineers know nothing about the third worst structural failure in modern history. Not even hit by a plane, this building. So we don't want your audience or any other audience to be the last to know. And that's why we keep talking about it everywhere. I'm one of 90,000 members of the American Institute of Architects. I didn't get one bulletin on this, the third worst structural failure. So it should have been the most talked about, studied structural failure through all the universities. I mean, this is the tallest building in most of our states, and yet it went down and people don't even know about it. It's half the height of the Twin Towers, as we see here. They were the tallest buildings in the world at the time they were built. But this building is about 100 yards away from the North Tower, north of the North Tower. And it was hit not by a plane, but by a few beams when the towers went down. But it still stands. In fact, NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, who was tasked by Congress to explain these collapses to the American people, they said, no, that wasn't the cause of the building's collapse. And they do talk about what they think brought the building down. But first, let's look at the building's collapse ourselves. The east penthouse in the upper left section in an isolated event falls, and then this happens. Now, this has never happened to a building on fire, but let's listen to the official narrative.
What we found was that uncontrolled building fires caused an extraordinary event. The collapse of World Trade Center 7 was primarily due to fire.
Okay, well, let's look at those fires, David. We've got fires like this and this and this. These are the worst fires that we have photographic or video evidence of in the building. They're few, they're small, and they're scattered. And let's face it, we've had much larger, longer lasting fires in steel frame, fire protected high rises like this, and not one of them has ever collapsed. Not even these after 9/11. And
wow.
There's been about 10 much larger fires than even
those. Look
these.
like the whole entire building is on fire, every single floor.
This has happened almost a dozen times since 9/11. Not one of them has ever come down. So this is an extraordinary claim made by NIST, and so we're going to evaluate it according to the scientific method. And so we ask ourselves, well, what buildings have come down like this? Well, controlled demolition brings these buildings down, right? Well, there's a set of features associated with controlled demolition. One of them is that there's a sudden onset of the building's destruction, usually at the base of the structure. Let's see if that's the case here. Again, the east penthouse on the upper left is an isolated event, and then the entire building does this. Yep, straight down, symmetrical. Fascinating, right? So
Clean, professional.
It's very professional. Let's see how Dan Rather narrates this for us on the day of 9/11. It's extraordinary. Oh.
What you're seeing are high shots. Now, here we're going to show you a videotape of the collapse itself.
Describe that.
Now we go to videotape the collapse of this building.
It's amazing.
Amazing, incredible, pick your word. For the third time today, it's reminiscent of those pictures we've all seen too much on television before, when a building was deliberately destroyed by well-placed dynamite to knock it down.
What? Deliberately destroyed by well-placed dynamite to knock it down. He's actually describing what we're seeing. He's using his intuition. He's seen the old hotels in Las Vegas like we have. And everybody should be using their own intuition instead of being told that this is an apple when in fact it's an orange. We've never seen, though, this building, the video of this building's collapse on mainstream at TV at all, except 2 times on 9/11 itself. How do you bring a building straight down symmetrically? You have to take out all the core columns at once within a fraction of a second of each other, and then followed about a second later by the perimeter columns, and repeat that synchronistically timed floor by floor all the way down or all the way up the building. And that's incredible, because what has the precision to do that? These fires? No, not these fires. So right off the bat, you can see why there's 3,600 architects and engineers signed up demanding a new investigation, staking their reputations on this. And those that can be found at the website richardgage911.org. And so feature number 4, is there a free fall acceleration? How fast is the building coming down? Physicists have clocked it. It comes down as fast as a bowling ball falling from the sky. What does that mean? That means there's no structure underneath the collapse. That's all it can mean. That means that not one of the 80 columns in this building gave any resistance for any period of time during that 3-second period of its 7-second fall. A third of its fall is at free fall. And this is finally admitted by NIST after first denying it, that it came down by free fall. They were publicly embarrassed by members of AE 9/11 Truth. And they are having to admit it, but they don't acknowledge the implications of that, which is that there's no structure anywhere doing anything. That's absolutely incredible. That would mean that it was controlled demolition. That would mean that there'd be explosions. That would mean that people would have heard the explosions. But let's listen to NIST's explanation of that.
We did not find any evidence that explosives were used in the collapse of Building 7. We ran down detailed computer simulations of blast scenarios. This size blast would have produced an incredibly loud sound that was not recorded on videos of the collapse, nor reported by witnesses.
Well, let's listen to a few and see if there are. Here's Daryl, a medical student near Building 7.
We were watching the building actually because it was on fire. The bottom floors of the building were on fire, and we heard this sound that sounded like a clap of thunder. Turned around, we were shocked to see that the building was, it looked like there was a shock wave ripping through the building, and the windows all busted out, and it was horrifying. And then, about a second later, the bottom floor caves out, and the building followed after that, and we saw the building crash down all the way to the ground. You were in shock. And then the worst part.
It's amazing. How about Kevin McPadden, former Air Force medic?
And then it was like another 2-3 seconds. You heard explosions, like boom. It's like a distinct sound. It's not like when in compression, like boom, 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 like floors that were dropping and collapsing. This was boom, and like you felt a rumble in the ground, like almost like you wanted to grab onto something. That, to me, I knew that was an explosion.
And this gentleman.
I'm going to call in Bill Rosati. He was here when it all happened. He saw it for himself. Bill, if you can just tell us what you saw, what you heard.
I was standing like 2 blocks away, and all of a sudden I just seen a big flash, and then I seen the building coming down, and I just seen people just running everywhere, chaotic like.
A big flash, too. And this gentleman, Barry Jennings, who, along with Mayor Giuliani's attorney, Michael Hess, these two had been asked to come to a meeting in the building after the planes hit the towers, but before the towers came down. There, for a long period of time, in that interim, they are trying to get out of the building. They went into it not realizing it had been evacuated, and here they are trying to get out of it.
When we got to the 8th floor, I started walking to one side of the building. That side of the building was gone. The first explosion I heard when I was on the stairwell landing, when we made it down to the 6th floor. Then we made it back to the 8th floor. I heard some more explosions.
What sort of sound?
Like a boom. Like an explosion.
More than one?
Yes.
We started walking down the stairs. We made it to the 8th floor. Big explosion. Blew us back into the 8th floor.
When we get outside, a police officer comes to me and says, you have to run. We have more information of bombs, so you have to run.
Bombs like this going off in the late morning of 9/11?
Yeah, here's one of the guys. He can tell you I'm okay, all right? Here, hold on. You want to call your mother or something?
They're all denied these sounds of explosions and these witnesses by NIST, who said they interviewed over 100 people about explosions.
The interesting thing with that is the proximity of the time that it happened. This wasn't a year later. They're all remembering it exactly the same differently. This is the day of, right close to the event. They're all having the exact same recollection of what just happened, which they're trying to deny is even a possibility.
Yeah.
But these are all firsthand witnesses. Again, this isn't 10 years later. What did you see? And they all come up with different memories. It's the exact same story by many people immediately next to the event.
Yeah, it's well corroborated that way. And when we put Building 7 on the left and a series of controlled demolitions on the right, this is also corroboration because, does it look anything like a controlled demolition? Well, does it look enough like a controlled demolition to be seriously evaluated as a hypothesis? Since it looks exactly like one, and since Building 7 on the left has never, or any building on fire has never collapsed.
It's almost
fires.
Better.
It's almost smoother.
It's almost smoother and cleaner and more professional than the scheduled
symmetrical
ones.
Yeah. It has all the features that controlled demolitions are supposed to have. It's an excellent job, and should have been the most looked at hypothesis by NIST, but it was relegated to a series of very frequently asked questions to be put on their website as such 10 years later. So NIST is really trying to bury this story. But when we look at the evidence of extreme heat, it gets even more interesting. The National Fire Protection Association Guide 921 for Fire and Explosion Investigation says, look for large volumes of gas and the large amount of heat released in chemical explosions causing rapidly expanding plumes of hot gases like we see racing in every direction away from Building 7 with these cauliflower-shaped expanding plumes, indicative of a whole lot of heat, more heat than these fires that we have available, which were surely, by the way, snuffed out by the mechanical action of the collapsing building. No, we're looking for a whole lot more heat, something on the order of this. And yes, we find it. In fact, we look at the NASA air flights with their infrared sensitive cameras, and we find surface temperatures of 1,340 degrees on the surface of the pile, but there's no fire on the pile. And those temperatures are associated with the hottest office fires. So what are they measuring? They're measuring something much hotter, deeper down in the pile, that's cooling off by the time it reaches the surface. What could that be? Well, FEMA tells us, they give it to us, in fact, on a silver platter in their Appendix C of their Building Performance Assessment Team report, May of 2002. Limited metallurgical examination. They do a metallurgical examination of the steel in Building 7, and they find never before observed eutectic reactions, intergranular melting, a solid steel girder turning into Swiss cheese, like this end of a beam from World Trade Center 7. This does not happen by office fires. It certainly doesn't happen by jet fuel, which is essentially kerosene, which in jet fuel didn't even figure in, of course, at Building 7. It wasn't hit by a plane. Right. But even jet fuel only burns 600 degrees Fahrenheit, according to its manufacturer, ME Petroleum.
And again, just for people that are listening and they don't know, obviously the people are most familiar with the plane flew in here, a plane flew in here. These both crash hours and hours and hours later because of embers that fell off of these buildings to Building 7. It was like an internal office fire. So they're saying all of this came because most people don't even recognize that there was another building that went down in New York City. Like they've never heard of Building 7. That's when I'm in conversations with people at live events, we're talking about things. I'm like, you know, like a reawakening moment, kind of like, where did you kind of start thinking maybe narratives? And for me, a big one was Building 7. But they're like, most people don't even know that there's another building that went down this day.
It was hard to get my head wrapped around it myself. I'm going, wait a minute, I would have heard. I'm an architect, you know. It would have been the most studied building failure ever. But no, it was swept under the rug by the American Institute of Architects, by the American Society of Civil Engineers, which shows you that this sphere of corruption extends well beyond those who planned and executed the event, but to those who were needed to cover it up, much like the COVID scamdemic. But they also document rapid oxidation, sulfidation, liquid iron, that's molten iron, by the way, that's more than 2,800 degrees Fahrenheit, more than 3 or 4 times the temperature that the hottest office fires ever get to. Office fires don't melt steel or iron, not the framing members of these buildings. Sulfur formed during this hot corrosion attack on the steel. Where did the sulfur come from? That's a fascinating topic we'll get into another time. But their shadow is all over the evidence, even though they deny all of this evidence of extreme heat. And yet, Jonathan Barnett, one of the authors of the FEMA report, actually says steel members in the debris pile appear to have been partly evaporated in extraordinarily high temperatures. But it takes 4,000 degree temperatures to evaporate steel. Again, more than 4 times the temperatures that office fires can get to. So what's going on here? We'll come back to this when we look deeper into the Twin Towers, but know that the University of Alaska spent 4 years studying this building failure, and they and $300,000 of funding. And one of the top forensic structural engineers in the country, Professor Leroy Hulsey, does an analysis with his PhD students, finite element analysis. And what was their conclusion? Fire did not cause the collapse of Building 7. The temperatures were not high enough to cause the weakening of the steel framing. And the thermal expansion did not result in a loss of support for the beams and the girders. The building didn't experience a progressive collapse, as NIST claimed, but a global collapse caused by what? The near simultaneous failure of all of its columns. How does that happen? They don't speculate. But we began already to look at evidence which is convinced through the 10 key characteristic features of controlled demolition. Fire can't account for any one of these features, let alone all of them, with additional circumstantial corroborative evidence and testimony, eyewitness testimony. That's proof of controlled demolition, a body of proof that has convinced 3,600 architects and engineers to sign on to the petition demanding a new investigation, many of which are included as experts in the film that we're making right now, 9/11 Crime Scene to Courtroom. It'll begin to be released this September in 24 episodes, and people can co-produce the film. We're inviting everybody to be a part of this. The post-production needs funding as well, and so with a $500 donation, in fact, toward co-producing the film, your name will be in the credits of the film coming up right here, September 11th, and happening right now as you're watching this.
Wow.
In fact, so as easy as that evidence is in just its limited form, I gave you the short abridged version. It's even more clear at the buildings 1 and 2, North and South Tower. So let's look at them, because we've got almost identical collapses. Why? How could buildings with different damages from the planes and the fires have almost identical collapses? Let's get into it, because we have the same set of features to be looking at, very similar anyway, with features of controlled demolition. Beginning with, is there a sudden onset of the destruction of the North Tower? Well, we're looking, it's still, and then all of a sudden it's in uniform downward motion, no jolt, no hesitation at the impact of the cold hard steel below. So right away we're curious, how could that happen? It should have been stopped by the heavier, stronger steel. Same thing at the South Tower. It's still, and then it's all of a sudden in uniform downward motion. We'll talk about how fast that is happening real quick. But are there witnesses of explosions like we had at Building 7? Well, Graham McQueen uncovered in 12,000 pages of testimony that was orally recorded of the first responders, finding that 156 of them are direct eyewitnesses of explosions, none of which were picked up in the witnesses that NIST included in their final report. So they have weeded all of these out. I can't read all of them to you, but we got to look at a few key ones. We felt the ground shake. The ground is shaking. Wait, you got 1,000 feet up. You've got a plane impact and fires in buildings, and now the ground is shaking. You could see the towers sway. Okay. And then it just came down again.
So that's a person on the ground. We felt the ground shake. Boom.
Yeah.
And then a sway, and then a controlled collapse.
Yeah.
That's an interesting sequence of events.
And that repeats itself through most of these events, like this one. All of a sudden, the ground just started shaking. It felt like a train running under my feet. The next thing we know, we look up and the tower is collapsing. Shook my bones. Shortly before the first tower came down, I remember feeling the ground shaking. I heard a terrible noise, and then debris just started flying everywhere. An explosion appeared at the very top simultaneously from all four sides. Materials shot out horizontally, and then there seemed to be a momentary delay before you could see the beginning of the collapse. How specific can it get, David? Let's look and see what they're talking about. North Tower on the right, a known controlled demolition on the left, slowing it down halfway. Is there any similarity? Is there enough similarity to warrant an investigation into the possible use of explosives? Especially since it looks exactly like a controlled demolition, at least in the first 4 seconds here. Especially since fire, the official cause of these buildings' collapses, has never in history brought down a steel frame fireproofed collapse.
There's no steel framed structure like this that's ever collapsed due to fire and heat.
No, There is no steel framed, fireproofed structure. See, there's warehouses that have collapsed. They're just steel. They have a huge fuel load. But high risers are a whole different class. They're called type 1 construction. They don't do this. They've never done this. Wow. They're steel framed and they're fireproof, 2 and 3 hour protection. They survive 2-hour fires, 3-hour fires. These are only 45-minute fires and an hour-long fires. So they should have survived. And what did people hear who were these witnesses of explosions?
Floor by floor instead of out.
It was if they had detonated. They were planned to take down a building. Boom, 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 boom.
All the way down.
I have dozens of witnesses.
And those are EMT first responders.
Fire department, New York. These are firefighters who were working house.
Hey, Richard, can you play that again? That goes by so quick. Can we hear those guys again, the firefighters?
Floor by floor instead of out.
It was if they had detonated. They were planned to take down a building. Boom, 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 boom.
All the way down.
There are dozens of these similar quotes, and they're going to be in the documentary 9/11 Crime Scene to Courtroom, which is why it's so important. This is going straight to a grand jury not straight, but through a federal judge in Washington, D.C. I'll explain that in a minute.
Okay.
NIST says the top part drove the rest of the building down to the ground, and then it destroyed itself. Well, they get this from Zdenek Bazant of Chicago Northwestern University, who's a mathematical wizard who did a calculation to support his theory, and he submitted it just in a very extremely complex paper, submitted just 2 days after 9/11. Right? The rest of us are in shock trying to figure out who's attacking us and so forth. And this guy submitted the paper, working on it 48 hours, and it took other structural engineers 10 years to decode it, finding it full of fraud.
This guy's a genius.
Oh, yeah. And what he did in his genius is he hid from structural engineers for a decade the massive doubling of the mass up above the point of jet plane impacts, and reducing by a factor of 3 the capability of the cold, hard, intact steel below to resist that load. And so that's how he came up with his theory. And that mathematical paper remains the key theoretical basis today for NIST's column failure theory. But there's just a more obvious problem other than the fraud, which we just exposed and will, that the upper part can't destroy the lower part. When there's an equal and opposite destructive force when two bodies collide. Let's just watch it. That's exactly what happens. Watch the lower red line. The upper part is destroying itself. There's no downward momentum in the first 3 seconds, pushing the rest of the building down. If there were, we would see it in the photographs or videos. It's gone. It's been destroyed, as you saw in the first 3 seconds, proving that this theory is completely fraudulent. If it were there, you would see it crushing these. They would have crushed these few remaining core columns that stand for 6 seconds after the rest of the building has been destroyed by explosives, as we'll see. And then it shakes and it comes down.
It falls after.
Frame by frame, falling into it, the rest of the footprint. Do we have a straight down symmetrical progression like Building 7? We have that kind of destruction, just like the firefighters described, like a belt all around the building, all 4 sides, straight down and symmetrical. Wait a minute, we have asymmetrical damage from the fires, asymmetrical damage from the airplanes, and asymmetrical damage in the case of the South Tower from this building falling off of it. The upper part started to fall off, but complete symmetrical damage all the way down. Let's zoom into the lower leading corner of this destruction and tell me what you see, David.
It looks like every floor is just being blown out one at a time. Boom, boom.
You can see the individual explosions.
Yeah, just like the firefighters described, floor by floor, boom, 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 timed out one after the other.
Yeah, and that's what they heard. They said, like firecrackers, pop, pop, pop. And this is proof of their testimony. And it's about every third floor. It's very difficult to see the floors, of course, in the building with the vertical striation. But what else do we see? Are there isolated explosive ejections? Take a look. Let's see, 20 stories down below, 40 stories down below, these isolated explosive ejections called squibs in the controlled demolition industry. 60 stories down below. What in the world of the official story can possibly account for these isolated explosions? Now, it makes no sense whatsoever. We actually see these are not puffs of air. They're solid objects being hurled out of the sides of the building. In fact, in the South Tower on the left side, again and again, you'll see about a dozen isolated explosive ejections. And these are what's responsible for the destruction of the interior of the top section of these buildings. It's very clear. And how fast is the building coming down? This is really important. On the left, we can time it. On the right, we can see it. You get an incredible sense of the speed of destruction over 110 stories in just a dozen seconds. All the stories are destroyed. How fast is that? It's free fall, almost free fall acceleration. It's 2/3 of free fall acceleration. That means that these columns, including 47 massive core columns inside the building, gave almost no resistance. That's incredible. There's more steel on the facade of this building than there is glass. And yet it's as if it weren't even there because they've been totally shattered. Let's jump to NFPA 921 again. Guide for Fire and Explosion Investigation says, look for shrapnel effects, high order damage, characterized by the shattering of the structure, producing small pulverized debris, with the building completely demolished, debris thrown great distances. That's exactly what we're looking at in the Twin Towers. In fact, they've been blown all the way down, save these remaining shards of exterior structural steel sections to their individual components, ready for loading and shipment. One of the goals of controlled demolition. Get it all done by the explosives, so the iron workers don't have to take away a 40-story structure. Extremely dangerous work. How about lateral ejection? Well, the NFPA guide also says look for blast pressure wave effects. Heavy structural steel pieces freely flying, landing and embedding themselves in skyscrapers all around the World Trade Center and destroying the massive World Financial Center, the Winter Gardens, particularly 500 feet away.
So that's a steel beam that came off randomly. It was shot over there, which definitely implies blasts.
Yeah, some of these 4 and 8 ton structural steel sections land 600 feet away. These here are landing 300 feet away. Many of them are 600. Look at this one, right into Building 7, doing some of the damage there, starting the fires. Well, but wait, back 2, 3. Is it going out? How does gravity work? Down. We were told this is a progressive collapse. Gravity works down. This is being hurled out. And with the energy, by the way, of enough force to hurl a 200-pound cannonball 3 miles. But these are 4-ton and 8-ton structural steel sections. By the way, if all those sections were hurled outside the footprint, as we can see by looking at the photos, there's not a stack of steel 20 stories tall. What's crushing the building?
Great question.
That is more than half the weight of the building. The steel, 100,000 tons in each building. If it's outside the footprint up to 600 feet, it's not available to crush the building. So that that calculation that Zdenek-Bazant did not only used the weight of the steel here and the weight of the concrete, which we'll come to, but he doubled it fraudulently, the mass up above the point of jet plane impacts, so that he could actually get mathematically a collapse. But it's all fraudulent, and this proves it. This and other points prove it. Look at the floors. There was 110 floors, each an acre in size, each 4 to 8 inches thick. That's 90,000 tons of concrete. Where is it? It's not stacked up at the bottom. In a real gravitational collapse, we see pancakes on the right.
Yeah, you think they'd be on top of each other, and they would all still kind of be there smushing down, creating the weight for it to continue.
Exactly. But we don't see that. I mean, look at the pile on the left. It's a 3, 4, 5-story pile of core columns, miscellaneous metal, but most all the steel is outside the footprint and the concrete because it's missing, right? I mean, where is it? Oh, there it is. Pulverized.
Look at all that.
In midair. All the photos, all the videos show 90,000 tons of concrete in each building, pulverized to a fine powder, 100 micron particles actually, which is fascinating, and distributed from river to river across lower Manhattan in a 3 square mile area.
So all that, the dust is pulverized concrete, not ash.
That's right. There's no ash. There's I mean, there may be some ash from papers burning and so forth, but this is pulverized concrete. 30% of this dust, according to the USGS, is concrete, and less percentage is gypsum board and other things like people whose 1,000 of them, 1,100 of them couldn't even be found. They were pulverized to such small pieces, and in fact, 6,000 pieces small enough to fit into a test tube, and yet 1,100 there's no trace of. So that's how incredibly explosive this event was.
It makes it even more amazing that they were able to find one of the hijackers' passports in that find of debris so quickly afterwards.
Yeah. And by the way, if 90,000 tons of concrete is pulverized and spread over 3 square miles, how is it available to crush the building? What crushed the building? It wasn't the steel. It's not the concrete. That's 3/4 of the weight of the building. That, again, Zdenek-Bazant from Chicago Northwestern University doubled in order to get the building to collapse, and yet it wasn't even there to double, right?
Wow.
It's amazing. So surely, though, the evidence was preserved, and easily the largest and most perplexing structural failures in modern history. What happened to the evidence?
It's the biggest crime scene in U.S. history, for sure.
Oh, yeah. And yet here is structural engineer Abulhassan Astani Azal, who had a foundation, National Science Foundation grant to study the steel. Here he is complaining about what happened to the steel.
After 9/11, we realized that Port Authority of New York and New Jersey has sent all the steel that we need to study. That's why I'm here to study steel. Has sent all the steel to recycling plant to go to China for recycling. For what? For 15 cents a pound. Just nothing. And all the evidence of steel went to melting pot.
All the evidence of the steel went to the melting pot, to China for recycling, starting just 2 weeks after 9/11. Put on barges like this, 400 truckloads a day, and prompting Bill Manning, editor-in-chief of Fire Engineering magazine, to cry out, crucial evidence that could answer many questions is on the slow boat to China, showing the astounding ignorance of government officials to the value of a thorough scientific investigation. The destruction and removal of evidence must stop immediately, but it didn't. FEMA and Mayor Giuliani were actually in control of that, according to many sources. But why were they trying to destroy it so fast? Could it be that the evidence was in the steel and the aftermath and they needed to get rid of it? After all, we're looking at the material held in the hands of this crab claw excavator dripping with molten iron and molten steel. We can tell by the color of that dripping material what its temperature is. Here we're exceeding 2,500 degrees Fahrenheit. Office fires, and especially jet fuel, don't get that hot. ME Petroleum, the manufacturer of jet fuel, says their jet fuel burns in open air only at 600 degrees Fahrenheit. So where are we getting the temperatures for melting steel? Not from the fires. These fires are diminished and they're cool and they're going out at the time of the collapse, indicated by the thick black smoke. So what could it be? Let's take a look at some of the other witnesses. Molten steel beams, metal dripping from a beam, river of steel flowing, says who? The World Trade Center structural engineer himself, Leslie Robertson. I don't even know steel. Well, we know steel can melt in a forge, but this is not a forge, a super controlled environment. I don't even know concrete could melt, though. 3,200 degrees, concrete actually melts. Why is concrete melting, forming itself around this handgun in the police museum today, proving temperatures above 3,200 degrees Fahrenheit? Isn't that incredible?
Wow.
And so what's causing that? Maybe it's thermite. Thermite is a likely suspect, given its characteristics, noted by Dr. Stephen Jones to have a white, yellow, hot, liquid metal, like we see pouring out of the South Tower minutes prior to its collapse, like we see in the material dripping out of the crab claw excavators. He also
almost
says
looks like in Hawaii when you have the tubes of lava.
Yeah,
you know, that's what it looks like, lava tube pouring out of the building.
It's about the same temperatures too. It takes amazing heat. Not office fires, not jet fuel, but it would produce a whitish cloud of aluminum oxide ash also, like we see rising from the material pouring out of the South Tower minutes prior to its collapse. And like we see on these steel beams, one moment here.
The grapplers were pulling stuff out, big sections of iron that were literally on fire on the other end. They would hit the air and burst into flames.
Well, wait a minute. If they're bursting into flames when they hit the air, how in the world do we get trailing these steel sections thick white smoke clouds? We saw this earlier, but we didn't ask ourselves, why is it trailing thick white smoke clouds? Steel beams are not flammable in office fire or jet fuel conditions. What is going on in the ends of these beams? Thermite is the only reasonable explanation. This collapse looks more like a volcanic eruption in the Tongan Sea, with upward, outward, arching streamers, a geometry of fireworks, solid objects trailing thick white smoke clouds, molten. So what are we talking about here? And is there evidence of thermite in the World Trade Center steel? Excuse me, the World Trade Center dust, pulverized concrete powder. Well, the USGS gives us that answer, documented in their 2005 online report. They document billions and billions in all the samples of what? Previously molten, meaning 2,800 degrees, iron, the byproduct of thermite, not steel. Steel has an iron in it, but it's got other alloys. This is pure elemental iron. Spheres. Well, we'll look at the spheres themselves. But this is incredible because there's up to 4 tons of this material in the dust. They don't know where it is, where it came from. Wow, this is incredible. RJ Lee Group, an environmental consulting firm, says they're formed during the event, not before by the iron workers putting the building together, not afterward by the iron workers taking the building apart, but during the event. Well, the EPA says, we don't know what these are, but they're a signature component of the World Trade Center dust. It's not even WTC dust unless it has these unknown origin, previously molten iron microspheres. Well, where the heck did they come from? Let's look at an experiment of thermite, shall we? Small amount of thermite, light it up, looks like sparks, but they're not. They're molten iron, and they're spherical. Why are they spherical? Well, that's just what aerosolized liquids do under pressure. They form themselves through surface tension into spheres. Okay. Could that be what's responsible for the toasting of the tops of these cars in this very high heat event? There's no other rational explanation for the toasting of the tops of these cars.
Wow.
So if that was evidence, and it can only be, of ignited thermite, is there any evidence of unignited thermite in the World Trade Center dust?
Okay.
Well, a small team of scientists led by Niels Harrit in Copenhagen get a hold of 7 independently collected samples of the dust, such as this one from Jeanette McKinley's apartment across the street from the North Tower. All the windows blew in because of the explosives on the apartments across the street and filled their place full of this pulverized concrete powder in which was paint chips. Well, at least that's what they thought they were. They look like paint chips, like rust primer paint, primer paint, but they're attracted to a magnet, so they have a high iron content. What's all this iron doing in the red layer of these dual layered red-gray chips that they found in all the World Trade Center dust samples sent to them? They get real curious. They do analysis on the red side, XEDS, X-ray energy dispersive spectroscopy, and they find what? The ingredients of thermite, which is what? Iron oxide, essentially rust, iron oxide, and aluminum powder.
Wow.
Iron and aluminum are the ingredients of thermite. What's that doing in the red layer of these red-gray chips? Oh, they get real curious now. They zoom in 50,000 times with an electron microscope, and they find what? Iron oxide crystals, rhomboidally shaped, and aluminum platelets that are at the nanoscale, 1,000 times smaller than the diameter of a human hair. Nanotechnology. They're set in a bed of oxygen, silica, carbon. This is organic material that's used for the expansion in TNT, rapid expansion, which knocks things over. Incendiaries work by means of destruction by heat, 4,000 degree temperatures typically. So here they appear to have engineered an incendiary to become more explosive.
Not typically found in a regular office fire.
Nope. In fact, Lawrence Livermore Lab developed it. It's called super thermite. And when they put it in a heater, a differential scanning calorimeter, it ignites, producing a whole lot more energy. So it's a thermitic response, an exothermic response. That's just what they developed prior to 2001. Well, that's exactly what these red-gray chips did. The 4 of them that they put in the differential scanning calorimeter ignite at 758 degrees Fahrenheit, producing a whole lot more energy, just like the lab did at Lawrence Livermore. So now they know what they're dealing with. They're dealing with super thermite. Well, they also know something else, because when they exploded, they produce what? Molten iron microspheres with the same chemical signature as the molten iron microspheres produced in the World Trade Center dust as analyzed by the U.S. Geological Survey. So we know exactly where those molten iron microspheres came from. They came from these red-gray chips, as if we didn't know. They're found attached to partially ignited red-gray chips, as you see here and here.
Wow.
So you see, this is very sophisticated stuff, but when you get it down to these nanoparticles, the surface volume increases exponentially. So the chemical reaction is virtually instantaneous. It's extraordinary, and it becomes much more explosive. It's not made in a cave in Afghanistan. It's made only in the most advanced defense contracting laboratories. So their 25-page peer-reviewed paper documents that this red layer is unreacted thermitic material incorporating nanotechnology. It's highly energetic, pyrotechnic, or explosive. So that's damning evidence to the official story, and could be, if brought into a court or a special grand jury investigation, bring the real perpetrators to 9/11 of 9/11 to justice for mass murder and treason. After all, look at the proximity of the fireproofing upgrades in the World Trade Center towers, the proximity to the jet plane impacts. This is found out by Kevin Ryan from digwithin.net. So that requires more investigation as well.
Explain this a little better, what we're looking at right now, just to make sure that
we're looking at the floors that we have proof of, that had fireproofing upgrades. What does that mean? Well, fireproofing can be liquid applied, intumescent paint, it's called. So under the guise of a fireproofing upgrade, is it possible that nanothermite liquid applied dual layered application has been incorporated here in the months and years, up to a year prior to 9/11? It's possible, and it's likely, and it needs to be investigated in a real grand jury investigation, as do all of these proximities and features of controlled demolition, characteristic and some very uncharacteristic features of controlled demolition that we've uncovered today. It's all direct evidence of destruction with incendiaries and explosives. Fire doesn't create any one of these features, let alone all of them, right? With additional circumstantial corroborative evidence and testimony that we go into in our more extensive documentaries, we find this to be proof of controlled demolition, a body of proof that's convinced 3,600 architects and engineers to sign on to the petition demanding a new investigation. Many of them, again, will appear in the forthcoming episodes, 24 episodes of 9/11 Crime Scene to Courtroom. And again, we're inviting everybody to co-produce the film with a $500 donation. Your name is in the credits of this film. So we appreciate you.
Can they get to that by going to richardgage911.org? Is there links to that within there?
There absolutely is, right at the top, richardgage911.org. In fact, all this evidence is highlighted there. You can get these brochures, $10. You can give you 100 of them. You can pass them out to your congressman, all the architects and engineers you can find, everybody that you know, because we don't want them to be the last to know either, do we? No. So let's get everybody aware of the problem, right? So that's what I wanted to share with our listeners today.
Richard, I don't know how much into the speculation part of it you want to get into, or if you'd even do it at all, but that's the part, you look at the science, those are facts. People can kind of do with that what they may, but this always felt a little fishy for me from the beginning of the Osama bin Laden. He's running this thing from a cave in Afghanistan, this multinational operation. There's so many things that came out right away. You mentioned the 2 days later, they have a whole detailed, model of how it was done. The passport of one of the pilots, they found it on the ground, after the fact. There's just so many different things. Do you personally harbor any ideas of of the who's and what's, or where would they even begin that process? Let's say they bring this to the courtroom and they say, clearly, this was a demolition. Where would what would the list of suspects even begin to look like?
Well, I would imagine that they would want to start with cui bono, who benefited, follow the money. And there's James Corbett of the Corbett Report did an incredible 1-hour documentary on just that. It's called 9/11 Trillions, Follow the Money. And he lays out the suspects, as does Kevin Ryan in his book, Another 19 Suspects. So they're not hard to find. You'll find them at the top of industries like the arms industry, the oil industry, the banking industry, the insurance industry, the media, all of whom profited enormously from 9/11. And the media, of course, involved chiefly in the cover-up and the cheerleading running up to the invasions of Afghanistan and Iraq, which, by the way, were goals shared by the Project for a New American Century, a PNAC, a neocon think tank, which published their goals on their website, which is still in existence. And they say that we really need a massive increase in the Pentagon budget. We need a total dominance, regional hegemony in the Middle East, which is interestingly right along the same goals as Israel has, who had many dual citizens, Israeli Americans, in PNAC, which were brought into the Bush administration following the election that Bush claimed to have won. So, and I voted for him. So I was
a huge fan. He used to walk
around.
Large
awakening, and I'm apolitical now because you can't trust either party of this two-winged bird called the which we can call the Uniparty.
Yep.
But
agree.
PNAC has a very set of inspiring goals if you're a warmonger. But they said, absent a catalyzing and catastrophic event like a new Pearl Harbor, these goals will take a long, long time to achieve. And so Bush writes in his diary the next day, that day, we had a new Pearl Harbor today. And that's why David Ray Griffin's book is called A New Pearl Harbor. And he's written 14 books on this subject, and he's fingered many of the suspects as well in this series of books by the late, great David Ray Griffin.
So, Richard, there's things that have happened. You read about history books, and you can speculate on, the Nero in Rome, or something maybe happened 100 years ago, or that are only written about. This happened, well, for the majority of our listeners during our lifetime. In an era of video and camera, and you had NASA shots of thermal imaging, and there's so many eyewitnesses, yet they sort of were able to make the whole world not believe what you're seeing. They were able to put something in their hand and say, "You don't see this," and then set it down, and the world's like, "I didn't see this," and then they just go about their day. How
and not only that,
happen in this era?
Drum up to war and support an incredible war effort internationally.
It's an interesting thing, and to me, it kind of comes back more than anything else to the conversations like Project Mockingbird and these things of the unified messaging of the media apparatus and how powerful that is on people. We know it's powerful because they get you to buy products that are too expensive you don't really need to impress neighbors that don't really care. It's the influence of media and product placement in shows obviously is effective, or they wouldn't pay a lot of money to have Coca-Cola be in this movie and somebody drinking it in the background. All of those things are effective because they impact your behavior. They impact what you think, what you want, what you see. I guess where I'm headed with that is just, it's very scary how vulnerable we are in a world that's full of screens, that anything that they put on a screen, people just kind of believe.
Hey, I did too. I was rooting for Colin Powell as he was making his irrefutable case for weapons of mass destruction against Iraq before the UN. I wanted to go into Afghanistan and get those bastards who did this to us. That's where I was. I was a flag-waving Reagan Republican. And boy, it just all started to come apart when I heard the interview with David Ray Griffin on Bonnie Faulkner's Guns and Butter program in the East Bay, California. And I was just shocked to my core. I mean, as I heard this evidence, I knew something was right about it, but it challenged everything inside of me. I could feel my world just turning upside down. My worldview had been challenged. My psychological safety arrangement had actually been shattered, especially over the next 2 weeks as I verified everything I'd heard in that 45-minute interview. Man, I know exactly what you're talking about.
Well, I was right there with you. You know, Toby Keith playing in the background and you know, we'll put a boot in your ass and the whole bit. And, you know, I had goosebumps. I heard that song recently and I'm like, wow, what a different place we are in right now. And I think it's just important for people to take personal ownership of the things that you grab a hold of and you choose to hold on to long-term and believe, question them, you know, and not to the place of being paranoid, but question, look at, thank you. I mean, I'm proud of this audience for tuning in. It grows every week. We've had millions and millions of downloads just in the first few episodes we've done here of these conversations, of conspiracy conversations. And people are looking at things for themselves with, like, I think, clear, sober eyes and taking ownership of this process and beginning to use this media apparatus against those that would use it against us. We're using it to, hey, let's shine light on these subjects and kind of see what's out there. And I thank you for your time, the thousands of hours you've spent on this in your just unselfish way. You come onto a show like this and share your expertise. I thank you for what you've done so far. And I thank you for what you're continuing to do. And I just pray for great success on this documentary, that we just keep holding their feet to the fire and sharing the truth.
Yeah, right on, Dave. It's my honor, and let's just keep rolling until we break through. That's all we can do, man. 18 years. I thought it'd be over in 6 months, but I'm going to keep on rolling. So anyway, we can get it out there. Let's get it out there. You guys share this with your friends too, even your enemies. You'll be doing them a favor. Remember, love to your enemy. That's knowledge.
To get it out there, you guys, richardgage911.org, richardgage911.org. You guys make it a great day. Richard, we'll see you again next time. Thank you so much. And thank you, Flyover family. Thanks for joining me on this journey that we go through every single week. We got incredible guests coming up in the future, digging into all kinds of topics. And appreciate you coming along for the ride. This episode was brought to you by a guy that has not one, but two PhDs, Dr. Kirk Elliott. Stacy and I have known Dr. Kirk Elliott for over 25 years. His father was a mentor of ours. And while we were busy doing numerous different things throughout the path, he was busy in school studying economics, the central banks, and inflation. And basically figuring out how do we navigate to protect ourselves from the kind of people that do the kind of destruction we talked about in today's episodes. How do we protect ourselves from the financial ripple effects of what they're doing to the global economy? If you go back to when these buildings were blown up, an ounce of gold was worth about $270. Today, it's worth just slightly less than $2,000. But if you'd held on to that cash in the meantime, it would have been worth less and less over time. At any point, if you could turn your fiat currency into a tangible, real asset, like gold or silver, it is worth more over time. These guys just help you easily transition from fake money into a real asset effortlessly. Right now, silver is the move because the gap between gold and silver is larger than it historically should be. And they can help you navigate the process of moving from an IRA or savings or something that you have money. Again, if you have money in a shoebox, it's worth a little bit less every single day. A lot of places don't even physically take the cash. And you know, when you go to your bank, it's just zeros and numbers in a computer that they have complete control over as they're moving towards pushing us towards a centralized digital currency. And so the ability to navigate against those things and come out ahead the same way that nations are doing today. They're backing their currency with gold. You can do the exact same thing using silver to protect yourself. The benefit with silver is it's got manufacturing capabilities. You need it for electronics. You need it for so many things. And so it's going to do nothing but protect you against inflation and go up and up over time. So go to flyovergold.com and simply just fill out the form to have a conversation. And they'll walk you through. Here's what you would need to do. Here's the process. Here's what it would take. And then the ball's in your court and you decide, hey, is that the move for you or not? The great thing is that's a relationship you can establish and do over and over and again. Or if you decide, hey, it's time to get out of that and back into the stock market or into another thing, they can help with that process as well. That's exactly what we're doing. Our friends and family are doing. Our parents, pretty much everybody we know is working with Dr. Kirk Elliott because he's the most trusted person in that space. You can call and have a conversation with him yourself. Go to flyovergold.com today. You will be glad you did. You can sleep well at night. You guys, thanks again for joining us on this journey, and we will see you again next Saturday for another episode of the Conspiracy Conversations. Make it a great day.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Flyover Conservatives podcast with David and Stacy Whited. Please subscribe, hit the notification bell, and leave us a comment below. Lastly, if you enjoyed today's podcast, share with those who came to mind. Be blessed and make it a great day.